Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are taking on a figure whose career was, it was just so brief, so chaotic, and so blindingly bright that it fundamentally changed the course of music history.
We're talking about James Marshall, Jimi Hendrix.
Exactly. Born Johnny Allen Hendrix, he spent less than 4 years in the global spotlight. But in that time, he didn't just play the electric guitar. He completely, and I mean completely, redefined the relationship between a musician, electricity, and sound itself.
That redefinition is precisely the point, isn't it? It's why the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame describes him with this phrase that I just love.
What's that?
They call him, and I quote, arguably the greatest instrumentalist in the history of rock music.
Arguably the greatest.
Yeah. That phrase, just perfectly encapsulates the sheer magnitude of what he did. We aren't just talking about a virtuoso who could play fast.
No, not at all.
We're talking about an artist who created a complete paradigm shift, who literally turned noise into his own personal vocabulary.
Absolutely. So for this deep dive, that's the path we're charting, that short, explosive path. Our mission is to trace his development from, the rough and tumble Chitlin circuit where he was just the sideman,
Right.
through his revolutionary 3-album artistic peak, and right up to his tragic end at age 27.
And we really need to break down not just the performances we all know,
But the technical blueprint he invented. We have to focus on the specific gear, the modifications, the esoteric techniques he weaponized to create that one-of-a-kind sound.
it's a huge amount of ground to cover in what was an incredibly short, intense lifespan. And to really understand the success and, frankly, the chaos that followed, we have to start at the very beginning.
Which was marked by some really intense struggle and instability.
To put it mildly, yeah.
Okay, so let's unpack this formative period. It all starts in Seattle, but his early life, it was anything that's stable.
No, it was characterized by, this profound poverty and just constant familial upheaval. Jimmy was born in 1942. His parents, Al Hendrix and Lucille Jeter, they were young and they struggled.
A lot. A lot. Constantly moving, living right on the edge of poverty, and battles with alcoholism that created this really chaotic household.
And we know that the fighting between his parents, especially, it drove young Jimmy to withdraw.
Deeply. He would physically hide in a closet, just seeking refuge from all the noise and that instability.
It paints such a clear picture of a child just looking for escape, looking for security, wherever he could possibly find it.
And you can even see that instability reflected in his identity, in his name.
That's right. He wasn't born James Marshall Hendrix.
No, he was born Johnny Allen Hendrix. His father changed it in 1946 to James Marshall Hendrix, supposedly to honor his late uncle. So even his name was in flux.
And then the family unit itself just shattered.
It did. When his parents divorced in 1951, Jimmy was only 9. Al, his father, got custody of him and his brother Leon.
But his 3 younger half-siblings,
They had to be given up. The family situation was so dire they went into foster care or were adopted. The family was essentially broken. So it sounds like music became much more than a hobby for him. It was almost a necessary form of emotional survival.
absolutely. And there's this one fascinating, almost heartbreaking story from his elementary school that just perfectly illustrates this intense need for music.
You're talking about the broom.
The broom. A social worker at his school, Horace Mann Elementary, noted his habit of carrying a broom with him for over a year.
Just carrying it around.
Carrying it, cradling it, treating it like his guitar, and doing these elaborate air guitar sessions.
Wow.
And the social worker was so struck by this, she actually wrote a letter. She requested school funding for a real instrument for him.
On what grounds?
She expressed a genuine fear that denying him this outlet might cause psychological damage because he was already so withdrawn.
Think about that. A professional observer recognized the danger of separating this specific child from his creative outlet, even if that outlet was just a broomstick.
And even though the request failed to get funding, her assessment of his needs was absolutely spot on. He was practically pre-wired to be a guitarist.
So when did he finally get a real instrument in his hands?
Well, his real instruments came in stages, and mostly through accidental discoveries. The true start was around 1957.
Okay.
He was helping his father with a side job, and he found a 1-string ukulele in the garbage.
A single string.
That 1 string became his first teacher. He taught himself completely by ear, playing along to popular songs, especially Elvis Presley. He was obsessed with the rhythm and feel of tracks like Hound Dog.
That's the foundation right there. Learning rhythm and tone from just a single string. When did he graduate to a full guitar?
In mid-1958, he's 15, and he finally gets his first acoustic guitar for the grand sum of $5.
$5.
And he became instantly obsessive. I mean, spending hours just honing his craft, learning from more experienced local players, and absorbing the sounds of blues legends like Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, B.B. King.
Do we know the first song he learned to play all the way through?
We do. The very first complete tune he mastered was the dramatic sort of Nordish melody of the theme from the TV show Peter Gunn.
From the drive of Hound Dog to the swagger of Peter Gunn, that's a pretty good early sign of the musical diversity he'd later command.
Oh, absolutely. But that talent, almost immediately, it started causing him trouble.
His professional career started with let's call it a mishap.
A very public mishap. In mid-1959, his father finally bought him a white Supro Ozark electric guitar.
Right.
He played his debut gig with some unnamed band at the Jaffe Room of Seattle's Temple to Hirsch. And the gig ended. Well, ended abruptly.
He was fired.
Fired between sets for showing off, for inserting these flashy, unnecessary fills and solos where they just weren't wanted. He was already too much of a star for the room he was in.
It's the first real hint of his inability to conform, which really defines his entire career. But that path of instability, it continued, and it led him right into a massive life decision. The Army.
Yeah. In 1961, when he was just shy of 19, the law finally caught up with him.
What happened?
He was caught riding in stolen cars, what they called joyrides, on 2 separate occasions. And he was faced with a choice: serious jail time or enlisting in the U.S. Army.
So he chose the Army.
He chose the latter, enlisting on May 31st, 1961. So military service was a forced pivot for him. It was a way to avoid prison, not some expression of patriotism.
Not at all.
And after basic training, he was assigned to the 101st Airborne Division at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. The discipline, the regiment, it was an immediate shock to his system.
Yes, I can imagine.
He wrote home complaining that the training was nothing but physical training and harassment. But to his credit, he did commit to the required paratrooper training.
They completed it?
He successfully completed his jumps, and in January 1962, he was awarded the prestigious Screaming Eagles patch. It was a sign that he could endure rigorous demands when he absolutely had to.
But his commitment to the guitar always came first.
It always superseded his commitment to the uniform.
Yeah.
The Army and Jimi Hendrix were just never going to be a long-term match.
So his superiors noticed.
Oh, they noticed. They quickly saw a profound neglect of his official duties. He was caught napping repeatedly, failed to report for bed checks, and was even labeled an unqualified marksman.
So his platoon sergeant finally had enough.
He did. He filed this damning report that stated very plainly that Hendrix had no interest whatsoever in the Army and recommended he get a discharge as soon as possible.
And he was granted that discharge in June 1962. It was a general discharge under honorable conditions for unsuitability. For anyone listening who's not familiar with military terms, what exactly does that mean?
It's a good question. It's essentially a way of saying he couldn't adapt to the service life, but without implying any serious misconduct.
So he didn't commit a crime or anything?
Exactly. A general discharge under honorable conditions for unsuitability just means he couldn't adjust to the discipline, but he wasn't a criminal. It allowed the Army to quickly remove someone who's, just ineffective and completely uninterested.
And he tried to spin that story a bit later in life, didn't he?
He did. Hendrix later claimed he received a medical discharge, suggesting he broke his ankle during his 26th parachute jump.
A much better story.
A much better story. But official Army records show no confirmation of that specific injury. However, the time at Fort Campbell was critical for one very important reason.
He met Billy Cox.
He met fellow serviceman Billy Cox, who was immediately blown away by his playing.
Cox saw the raw, unschooled genius right away.
Absolutely. And he described his technique as this incredible, almost impossible combination of John Lee Hooker and Beethoven.
That's a fantastic description.
It really is. They formed a loosely organized band called the Casuals, and as soon as they were both discharged, they moved together to Clarksville and then Nashville, officially trading their uniforms for the life of working musicians.
And that's where part 2 starts, right there in 1962. They're moving into the brutal competitive world known as the Chitlin Circuit.
Yeah, and this was the true training ground for his performance style.
Can you explain what the Chitlin Circuit was?
It was a crucible, really. It was a network of venues across the South, specifically for black R&B, soul, and blues musicians. And it demanded not just musical chops, but a level of showmanship that could instantly captivate a crowd.
So when Hendrix and Cox formed the King Casuals, they plunged right into this scene.
Head first. And this environment is directly responsible for so many of his legendary stage antics, which he really developed out of sheer necessity.
Like playing with his teeth, for example.
That's a perfect example. You just had to stand out. The competition was so fierce, he had to find ways to get noticed. He learned to play with his teeth specifically to one-up another guitarist in the band, Alphonso Baby Boo Young, who was already doing it.
So it was a competitive thing.
Totally.
Yep.
Hendrix later explained the high stakes. He said, "The idea of doing that came to me in Tennessee. Down there, you have to play with your teeth or else you get shot."
Was it maybe a bit of an exaggeration?
Probably some hyperbole, yeah. But it really reflects that fierce pressure to entertain.
And for the next couple of years, he's just constantly gigging. Not as a star, but as a supporting musician for some of the biggest names in R&B and soul.
The list is just phenomenal, and it shows you the kind of rhythmic complexity he had to internalize. He played with Wilson Pickett, Sam Cooke, Ike and Tina Turner, Jackie Wilson.
So he's soaking up all this R&B groove.
Exactly. This deep immersion in tight, structured playing, it created a foundation that would later contrast so dramatically with his, soaring, chaotic, psychedelic lead work.
His highest profile job from that time was with Little Richard's touring band, the Upsetters.
Yes, that started in 1964. And while he made some early recordings like Testify with the Isley Brothers, his time with the very flamboyant Little Richard was short-lived.
They clashed.
Constantly. Over two things mainly: his chronic tardiness and his increasingly showy stage antics and wardrobe. Little Richard demanded that his sidemen fade into the background.
And Hendrix just couldn't do that.
He couldn't, or he wouldn't. He was already too much of a star, even when he was supposed to be supporting one. So Richard's brother fired him in July 1965.
Which marks the start of his solo journey, but also leads to the first serious career entanglement that would come back to haunt him.
The infamous Ed Chalpin contract.
Right.
So by October 1965, he's in New York, just trying to make ends meet. And despite having already signed a deal with Sue Records, Hendrix signs this legally consequential 3-year recording contract with an entrepreneur named Ed Chalpin.
For how much?
For a $1 advance.
$1.
And even though the relationship was short, that contract remained legally binding. And this mistake led to massive legal problems down the road, forcing him to produce an album for Chalpin years later.
Which would become the Band of Gypsys album.
Exactly. It's just amazing how a $1 mistake he made during the sideman grind affects one of his biggest, most critically analyzed career moments.
It really puts his financial and legal situation into sharp focus. So by 1966, he realizes he needs to get out of the restrictive R&B circuit.
He needs a more creative, experimental environment. He moves to Greenwich Village, forms a band called Jimmy James and the Blue Flames.
Which included Randy Wolf, who he famously nicknamed Randy California.
That's the one. And this is where the crucial pivot to London happens. And it's orchestrated by a very surprising figure.
A figure from the British rock aristocracy, no less.
Linda Keith, who was then the girlfriend of Keith Richards, she spotted Hendrix at the Cheetah Club and was just mesmerized by his playing. The volume, the energy, the technique.
So she knew he had to be seen in the UK.
She insisted on it. She specifically contacted Chaz Chandler, the bassist for the Animals, who was looking to move into management.
And Chandler came to see him play at Café Wah.
And it was a done deal. Chandler was instantly impressed, especially with Hendrix's cover of Hey Joe. He convinced him that his artistic future was in London, where the scene was just exploding with psychedelia and volume.
So Hendrix agreed, and they flew to London in September '66.
And upon arriving, Chandler makes one other small but crucial change. He changes the spelling of his first name from Jimmy to S.
Jimmy.
And that becomes the indelible brand. And the Jimi Hendrix Experience was formed very quickly after that.
With Noel Redding on bass and Mitch Mitchell on drums.
Right. Chandler brought in Redding, supposedly partly because Hendrix liked his mod hairstyle, which is a great detail.
It is.
And Mitch Mitchell on drums, who had this jazz background that gave the trio a frantic, improvisational flexibility that was just essential for Hendrix's style.
And the UK's rock elite took notice immediately. The moment he met Eric Clapton is just legendary.
It's symbolic of a torch being passed, isn't it? It happened just weeks after Hendrix arrived at the London Polytechnic. Cream was playing, and Hendrix asked to sit in.
And what did he play?
He unleashed this searing, frantic version of Howlin' Wolf's Killing Floor. And Clapton, who was known as God in London at the time,
The preeminent British guitarist?
he literally just stood in the wings and watched his entire world change.
Do we know if that was just a symbolic moment, or did Clapton actually react to it? I mean, did he change his playing style or his gear?
Oh, it had a profound and practical impact. Clapton later admitted he was daintily intimidated. He realized that the restrained blues virtuosity he was known for was suddenly just not enough compared to Hendrix's sheer sound manipulation and volume.
He summed it up perfectly.
He did. He said he walked off and my life was never the same again. And it immediately spurred Clapton towards greater experimentation.
So the UK embraces them instantly. They get 3 top 10 hits right off the bat. Hey Joe, Purple Haze, The Wind Cries Mary. But they needed a visual hook to match that incredible sound.
They absolutely did.
Yeah.
They needed to top the stage theatrics of bands like The Who,
Mm.
who were famous for smashing their instruments.
So Chandler and Hendrix are brainstorming how to get massive media exposure.
And a journalist jokes that it's a pity Hendrix can't set his guitar on fire.
And a legend is born from a bit of PR calculation.
Yes. On March 31st, 1967, at the London Astoria, Hendrix delivers this explosive set, douses his Stratocaster in lighter fluid, and sets it ablaze.
Earning him press labels like Black Elvis and the Wild Man of Borneo.
And Chandler, always the shrewd manager, decides right then and there that the flammable guitar stunt has to become a permanent part of the show. It transformed him from a talented musician into a dangerous, must-see rock archetype.
And that spectacle really ushers in part 3, the creative peak. It's encapsulated in 3 monumental studio albums, all released within this whirlwind 18-month period.
This is where the technical revolution really moves from the stage to the recording tape.
The foundation is Are You Experienced, released in the UK in May of '67, and the context here is crucial. They were recording on basic 4-track technology.
Which meant severe limitations compared to the studios that would come later. And yet the album showcases this massive range, from straight 12-bar blues like Red House.
Which is his only original 12-bar blues composition.
Right. All the way to radical sonic experimentation.
And those 4-track limitations force them to get incredibly creative with mixing and overdubbing to get those complex textures.
Precisely. The title track, Are You Experienced, is a prime example of pushing that tech to its absolute breaking point. It's filled with backward guitar, backward drums, vocal snippets.
And they achieve that just by flipping the tape reels around.
Literally just flipping the tape and recording backwards.
Yeah.
It was incredibly complex to synchronize on 4 tracks, but that's how they got that distinctly psychedelic, almost melting sound.
The album was a huge commercial success. It peaked at number 2 on the UK charts, and it was only kept from the number 1 spot by what is arguably the biggest album in music history.
Street Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
It's a classic rock history fact.
But the admiration between the artists was mutual and immediate. Just 3 days after Street Pepper was released, Hendrix opened a London show with a cover of the title track.
And Paul McCartney was there.
He was in the audience. He later called that performance one of the great honors of my career, noting how unbelievably quickly Hendrix had learned and reinterpreted their complicated new work.
But despite all that UK success, the real US breakthrough didn't come until a month later at the Monterey Pop Festival.
This was the absolute turning point. Their first US single, Hey Joe, had completely failed to chart. They were essentially unknown in America.
So how did they get the gig?
It took Paul McCartney personally lobbying the organizers. He insisted the festival was incomplete without Hendrix, calling him an absolute ace on the guitar.
And he delivered one of the most career-defining performances in rock history.
He closed the show in June of '67. The performance culminated in him kneeling before his Stratocaster, dousing it in lighter fluid, kissing it goodbye, and then setting it on fire as a sacrifice.
A sacrifice.
That's what he called it. He said, "You sacrifice things you love. I love my guitar."
And the photograph from that moment, captured by a 17-year-old Ed Carafe, it became iconic. It cemented his image and instantly transformed him from an unknown into the rock archetype of the psychedelic voodoo child.
Monterey made him a global legend overnight, although the follow-up gig was maybe the strangest pairing in rock history.
Opening for the Monkees' U.S. tour.
Which was quickly abandoned because their young audience, well, they didn't appreciate the band.
That commercial misfire seems to have only pushed him further into radical sonic experimentation, which is immediately audible on his next album, Axis, Bold as Love.
Exactly. Axis came out later that year and is full of technical innovations. The album opener, EXP, uses microphonic and harmonic feedback in this incredibly creative way.
And it has that early stereo panning effect where the guitar sounds like it's orbiting your head.
But the truly significant subtle detail for me is on the title track. Bold as Love.
You're talking about the phasing effect.
Yes. The coda of Bold as Love contains the very first recording of stereo phasing effects in rock music. This is a massive, quiet leap forward.
For listeners who aren't audio engineers, can you just briefly explain what phasing is and why that achievement matters so much?
Sure. Phasing, or sometimes flanging, is an effect you create by duplicating an audio signal, in this case the guitar, and then slightly delaying one copy.
Okay.
When you merge those two signals back together, the slight timing differences cause certain frequencies to cancel out while others are boosted, creating that distinct, sweeping whoosh sound.
Like a jet plane taking off.
That's the classic description.
Yeah.
It fundamentally changes the texture of the recording. It makes the guitar feel less like a traditional instrument and more like a fluid electronic soundscape.
It turns the whole composition into this immersive three-dimensional audio experience.
Perfect for the psychedelic era. And this album is also infamous for showing the sheer chaos that was already surrounding Hendrix. I'm talking about the lost tape crisis.
It's a story that just shows the fragility of his whole creative process.
The album was almost delayed because Hendrix lost the master tape of side one in the back of a London taxi.
He just left it in a cab.
Just left it. So he, Chas Chandler, and the engineer Eddie Kramer had to pull an all-nighter, remixing the entire side from safety copies. The pressure was immense, and the relationship between Hendrix and Chandler was already starting to fray.
And the detail about the song If 6 Was 9 is just pure rock and roll absurdity.
It is. The only usable safety copy they had was so badly wrinkled that it wouldn't run through the tape machine properly.
What did they do?
They had to literally iron the tape flat before they could use it in the final mix.
Wow.
That frantic high-wire act of creation just perfectly summarizes his working life.
And speaking of chaos, the album cover also caused some controversy.
It did. The psychedelic cover depicted the band as avatars of Vishnu and other Hindu deities. Hendrix was deeply disappointed. He felt it was inappropriate.
Why?
He noted that he had Cherokee ancestry and that the cover should have highlighted his American Indian heritage instead. He said quite clearly, "You got it wrong. I'm not that kind of Indian."
It reflects a yearning for identity that was often overlooked by the press, who were just focused on the psychedelic spectacle.
Exactly. And finally, that brings us to the third studio album, the chaotic masterpiece from 1968, the double LP Electric Ladyland.
This was the culmination of his early career. It was the only Experience album mixed entirely in stereo, and critically, the only one he produced and directed himself.
But that newfound autonomy created massive friction. This is where his perfectionism and his unique working style really drove his key collaborators away.
How so?
Hendrix's method involved demanding repeated takes, sometimes dozens of them, and often inviting a constant stream of guests and hangers-on into the studio.
So it wasn't a professional environment?
Noel Redding famously called the sessions a party, not a session, saying the distractions made productive work almost impossible. This led Chas Chandler, who couldn't handle the lack of discipline and the spiraling budgets, to quit as his producer and manager.
And Redding's input was diminished during this time as well.
Greatly. He found it so frustrating, he would sometimes just leave the studio. And as a result, Hendrix, the perfectionist, ended up playing many of the bass parts himself.
Like on 1983, a merman I should turn to be.
That's a key example. But despite all that internal friction, this became his commercial climax.
It was his most successful release and his only U.S. #1 album.
And it's a vast, diverse work. It has the incredible 15-minute slow blues jam, Voodoo Chili, which features Jack Cassidy from Jefferson Airplane on bass, and Steve Winwood from Traffic on Organ.
Captured during a spontaneous late-night session.
And then, of course, there's the definitive seismic cover of Bob Dylan's All Along the Watchtower,
which became his highest-selling single and his only U.S. top 40 hit.
He took Dylan's somber acoustic story and transformed it into this vast, panoramic sonic movie. And Dylan himself was deeply impressed. He later said, "He found things in it that I didn't know were there."
The album also introduced another element that would become totally synonymous with the Hendrix sound.
Burning at the Midnight Lamp is significant because it's his first recorded use of a wah-wah pedal.
Right.
He'd been fascinated after seeing Frank Zappa use one. And by the time of Electric Ladyland, he had mastered it, instantly creating one of the best-known wah-wah riffs in rock history with Voodoo Child. Slight return.
The album really proved he could blend his blues roots with his psychedelic vision perfectly.
It was the fullest realization of his ambition, as critics said at the time.
So if those three albums represent his incredible creative peak, Part 4 traces what came next. professional transition, personal unraveling, and the eventual tragic end.
That initial dynamic trio just could not sustain the chaos. The original Experience lineup officially ended in June of 1969, right after the Denver Pop Festival.
Noel Redding quit the very next day.
His frustration had just been mounting for months over Hendrix's chaotic work ethic, the lack of discipline, and the fact that Hendrix kept expanding the group without Redding's input.
So, with the end of the Experience, we see the return of an old friend, Billy Cox.
Yes, Billy Cox, who'd been so impressed with his John Lee Hooker meets Beethoven technique back in the Army days, he rejoined on bass. They formed a temporary band called Gypsy Sun and Rainbows.
And they only rehearsed for less than 2 weeks before their first performance.
But what a stage it was.
They headlined the Woodstock Music and Art Fair in August 1969, and by this point, Hendrix was the world's highest-paid rock musician.
He got a staggering $32,000 fee for that appearance.
But despite the massive paycheck and the headlining slot, the scheduling was a total mess.
It was. They ended up performing in the early morning hours of Monday to a severely diminished audience. The crowd had dropped from maybe 400,000 down to around 30,000.
And Hendrix himself was completely exhausted.
Reportedly, he'd been awake for over 3 days. And yet, that performance gave us the single most iconic moment of the festival.
And maybe the defining sound of the entire late 60s zeitgeist.
His instrumental rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner.
It was a technical tour de force. He used just copious feedback, extreme distortion, sustain,
to sonically imitate the sounds of rockets and bombs exploding over a war zone. And it was immediately interpreted by everyone as this powerful anti-war statement against Vietnam.
But it's fascinating that he later denied that specific political intention, framing it as "Go America." Given the impact of that performance, do historians generally accept his denial?
It is highly debated. About 3 weeks after the festival, he addressed it directly. He said, "We're all Americans." He was like, "Go America."
Ah.
We play it the way the air is in America today. The air is slightly static. See?
Slightly static.
Most historians see that explanation as an attempt to dampen the inevitable political scrutiny that followed such a loaded performance. But regardless of his intent, the sound he created using extreme technical manipulation to mimic warfare is undeniable.
Guitar World later named it the greatest performance of all time.
Based purely on its revolutionary sound.
So after Woodstock, Hendrix still had that lingering 1965 contract with Ed Chalpin to deal with.
Which is exactly where the Band of Gypsys project came from. To settle that legal dispute and fulfill his contractual obligation for a new album, he quickly formed an all-black power trio with Billy Cox and Buddy Miles on drums.
And this band represented a huge musical shift, moving away from psychedelic blues rock towards a blend of funk, soul, and pioneering jazz rock fusion.
It's a vital, though very short chapter. The album they made was the only official live LP released during his lifetime, and it contains what many critics call the absolute pinnacle of his entire career.
The track, Machine Gun?
The 12-minute track, Machine Gun. Musicologist Andy Alador called it the premier example of his unparalleled genius.
So what makes Machine Gun so technically paramount that it earns a description like that?
In that one track, Hendrix achieves complete mastery over his equipment. During the instrumental breaks, he uses high gain, massive overdrive, and effects like the Univibe.
Which simulates a rotating speaker.
Exactly. And he uses it all to create this aural landscape of war. He's consciously using the guitar to create sounds that precisely represent warfare. Rockets descending, bombs detonating, machine guns rattling.
He wasn't just playing music. He was using the guitar as a sonic FX generator to paint images of conflict.
You've got it. Unfortunately, the Band of Gypsys was incredibly short-lived. It ended abruptly at their third and final public performance in January 1970.
It was a disaster. Hendrix was reportedly disoriented, struggled through a few songs, snapped at a fan who requested Foxy Lady, and then just walked off stage.
And both Buddy Miles and Noel Redding later claimed that the manager, Michael Jeffrey, had given Hendrix LSD to sabotage the band because he wanted a more profitable Experience reunion.
Jeffrey fired Miles soon after that.
He did, and Cox quit temporarily, citing paranoia. But despite all the chaos and personal struggles, Hendrix remained fiercely committed to his professional future.
Which culminated in the construction of Electric Lady Studios.
A massive financial commitment, about $1 million in 1970. It was intended to serve two purposes. First, to house his boundless creativity, and second, to drastically reduce his enormous annual recording costs, which had swelled to around $300,000.
And the design itself was specifically tailored to foster a creative, non-pressured mindset.
Yeah, the architect John Storick designed it to be relaxing and psychedelic. He consciously avoided right angles, used round windows, ambient lighting. Hendrix wanted a sanctuary where the clock wasn't constantly ticking.
The studio officially opened on August 25, 1970.
A landmark professional milestone, which immediately preceded his final trip to Europe, from which he never returned.
He left for London right after the grand opening party.
He did. The subsequent Cry of Love tour was just fraught with problems, and he performed his final concert on September 6, 1970, at the Isle of Fehmarn Festival in West Germany, to booing and jeering from fans.
And Billy Cox, suffering from severe paranoia, quit the tour soon after, leaving Hendrix isolated in London during his final days.
He died on September 18, 1970, at age 27. The coroner concluded he died of asphyxia after aspirating his own vomit while intoxicated with barbiturates.
And his girlfriend later admitted that Hendrix had taken 9 of her Vesperex sleeping tablets.
An enormous dose, 18 times the recommended maximum dosage, believing they were just a mild sedative.
That detail just underscores the tragic, chaotic end to a life of such explosive intensity. His death cemented his place in the notorious 27 Club.
But the body of revolutionary work he left behind in that impossibly short window is simply astounding. And that brings us to the final, most crucial part of our dive. The enduring technical blueprint he left for every guitarist who followed.
Okay, so if he is the greatest instrumentalist, we need to understand the mechanics. How did he get that singular, aggressive, almost percussive snap and sustain? Let's start with the guitar he's most associated with, the Fender Stratocaster.
The Strat was his primary weapon, and the fundamental source of his unique tone is actually an accidental technical modification.
He was left-handed.
He was left-handed, but he played right-handed models turned upside down and restrung. And this simple inversion created a unique and irreversible difference in the instrument's wiring and physics.
So why is that reversal so crucial to the sound?
It's all about the bridge pickup. On a Stratocaster, that pickup is slanted. Traditionally, the highest strings are closer to the bridge for a bright, thin tone, and the lowest strings are closer to the neck for a warmer, bassier tone.
Right.
When Hendrix flipped and restrung the guitar, that slant was reversed.
Okay, so the lowest strings, the bass notes, were now closer to the bridge.
Exactly, which made them brighter, more aggressive, and gave him a more percussive snap. And conversely, the highest strings, his melody notes, were now warmer and darker.
That inversion fundamentally changed the balance of the instrument. It pushed the treble frequency into the low strings, which is crucial for understanding the aggressive rhythm tone we hear on tracks like Fire.
Absolutely. It gave him an aggressive attack on the bass strings while providing this thick, throaty sustain on the higher strings, a key departure from traditional Strat tone.
And beyond the guitar itself, his choice of amplification was absolutely critical.
In the US, he used Fender Twin reverbs. But when he got to the UK, he quickly shifted to 100-watt Marshall Super Lead amplifiers.
And he often used 3 of those enormous stacks at the same time, basically ushering in the age of arena volume.
He did. And the shift to Marshall was crucial, because the British Marshall sound is inherently different from the US Fender sound.
How so?
Fender amps are known for their clean headroom and chime. Marshalls are known for their mid-range focus and aggressive breakup. Hendrix needed that saturation the Marshalls provided to get the thick, harmonic-rich sustain he wanted on massive UK stages.
And he was famous for the Hendrix setting,
Which was turning all the control knobs to the maximum level. Volume, treble, mids, everything on 10.
So the combination of the maxed-out Marshalls and the restrung inverted Strat produced the physical foundation of his sound. But the genius was how he treated the guitar not just as wood and wire.
But as a fully electronic sound source, he was instrumental in mainstreaming effects pedals that were brand new at the time, and he pioneered using them to turn previously undesirable sonic artifacts, like feedback and distortion, into an expressive personal vocabulary.
And his collaboration with the electronics enthusiast Roger Mayer was key to this.
He called Mayer the secret of his sound, and Mayer provided the first of the major custom effects we associate with him, the Octavia.
Right.
The Octavia is this custom-built effect that adds an octave doubling effect to the signal. He first recorded with it on the blistering guitar solo for Purple Haze.
And then there was the ubiquitous fuzz face for distortion.
And it's important to understand how he used the fuzz face differently than his contemporaries.
Right.
Others used it as just a dirty boost, a way to slightly overdrive a clean signal. Hendrix, however, used it in conjunction with his maxed-out 100-watt Marshall stacks. And this combination generated massive, sustained distortion.
Which allowed him to pull out those singing harmonics and that thick, controlled feedback.
Exactly. Making it sustain like a violin, rather than just producing uncontrolled squealing noise.
And of course, the wah-wah pedal, which we first heard on Electric Ladyland.
The wah-wah, which he used for that iconic crying effect, especially on Voodoo Child, slight return. And he also heavily used the univibe.
Which isn't a vibrato, it's a Leslie speaker simulator.
The sophisticated one, yeah. It provides that deep, swirling, phase shift modulation. We hear that all over his Woodstock performance, and it's crucial to the sonic warfare he creates on Machine Gun.
So beyond the hardware, his actual playing technique was visually and technically unique. That ability to play rhythm and lead at the same time.
This came partly from his years fronting a trio, where he had to fill a huge amount of sonic space. He developed the ability to play complex rhythm chords and lead lines together, creating the illusion of 2 or 3 guitarists.
But the single most specific detail is his revolutionary hand positioning.
The famous thumb technique. He just rejected standard fretting conventions entirely.
How did it work?
Instead of using bar chords, he frequently fretted the low 6th string root notes with his thumb wrapped over the top of the neck.
A piano style.
That's what it's been called. And it allowed him to sustain the root notes of chords while keeping his fingers free to play melody, bend notes, or add vibrato on the higher strings.
That is an incredibly technically a demanding approach, and it's visually so recognizable.
It's extremely difficult, especially on a Stratocaster neck. He leveraged his large hands to do it, and it allowed for this unparalleled harmonic fluidity between the rhythm and lead parts, making his playing sound impossibly rich. You hear it constantly on tracks like Little Wing.
And what about his tuning? Did he stick to standard pitch?
No. In the last 3 years of his life, he universally tuned his guitar down a half step to E-flat.
And why did he do that?
2 key reasons. It made string bending easier by reducing the tension, and it dropped the overall pitch, which helped him accompany himself vocally, as his speaking voice was naturally quite low.
So if you look at his influences, it's a perfect melting pot of his background. Electric blues, R&B, even folk from Bob Dylan.
And that influence just flowed outwards into almost every subsequent genre imaginable. Hard rock, heavy metal Black Sabbath, Judas Priest funk, grunge Kurt Cobain, Pearl Jam, even hip-hop.
The ultimate validation probably came from the jazz world, though.
Indeed. Miles Davis was deeply impressed by Hendrix. He compared his improvisational abilities to jazz giant John Coltrane. Davis was so taken that he tried repeatedly to collaborate with him and even asked his own guitarist to emulate Hendrix's style.
But despite the posthumous deluge of recordings, the legal issues around his music continued for decades.
Yeah, thanks to that early Ed Chalpin contract and other loose agreements. By 1967, scores of unauthorized, remixed, pre-experience recordings were being marketed to the public. These unauthorized releases swelled to hundreds of albums, which Hendrix himself denounced as malicious and greatly inferior.
But the family did eventually regain control.
After a very long legal battle, his father, Al Hendrix, finally regained control of his son's song and image rights in 1995, forming Experience Hendrix LLC.
And that allowed the estate to properly curate his legacy.
Exactly. They could issue high-quality releases and shut down the endless stream of inferior, unauthorized material.
And the recognition is definitive. Grammy Lifetime Achievement, Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and Rolling Stone ranking him the #1 greatest guitarist of all time. He may have only had 4 years in the spotlight, but he defined the electric guitar for the rest of the century.
He essentially gave the instrument a new voice, a new purpose, and a new future in the span of just 3 studio albums and 1 definitive live recording. His career is just a remarkable juxtaposition of technical genius wrapped in a life of high chaos and profound brevity.
It's an astounding output for such a short life. He taught us that the electric guitar wasn't just an instrument. It was a noise machine, an electronic canvas capable of painting these incredible landscapes of emotion, violence, and psychedelia.
And the most incredible part of his story is how he was always pushing forward, always experimenting, right up until the very end.
And that brings us to our final provocative thought for you to consider. Despite his prolific recording sessions and his constant push for new sound, Hendrix left behind a concept album tentatively titled Black Gold. These tapes, recorded in the months before his death and full of demos for what would have been his next chapter, remain in the possession of Experience Hendrix LLC and have never been released. Given that he was the architect of modern guitar sound, constantly finding new technical vocabulary, what further innovations, what never-before-heard sonic inventions might still be waiting to be unearthed in the vault.